going to get started in just a little bit here, but I want to do a little question for you guys as we start. How many of you have electric cars right now? Drive an electric car. Would you buy it? Would you buy another electric car?
At least the first, I just bought a second.
At least the first, just bought a second. Okay, how many of you, when you're considering buying a car or are going to buy a car in the next few years, how many of you are thinking about buying a new car in the next 5 years? 5 years, 5 years. How many of you of those will you consider an electric car? How many of you not just consider but will buy an electric car? Okay. So is that Ford 150 looking pretty good? That looks sweet. 0 to 60 in 4 seconds? Well, what they don't say is the other one's like 5.9. It's not that much slower for the combustion. So should we get started? I guess it's 11:15, so I can, or 11:15. The reason I asked that question is that the electrification of the built infrastructure, right? The electrification that's going to be like the distribution infrastructure that's going to be required to power all these electric cars is going to require probably 2 to 3 times the current electrical infrastructure that we have in the country in terms of the distribution infrastructure. If we are in fact to electrify and the whole distinction of decarbonization, right? Taking the carbon out, the extent that that happens, right? So one of the things I wanted to talk about was, you know, the fellow, I guess, in the opening speaker talked about market transformation. And I just think that's just one of those market transformations that is not being driven by the government. It's being driven, you know, the car companies are saying, this is what we're doing. Elon Musk, you know, basically said, you know, he was bankrupt almost remember he was like almost bankrupt a few years ago? And now he's the richest person on the planet. He might be bankrupt again. Who knows? Twitter's an interesting game. I think I've got to hit this button to move some of these forward. Let me be sure about that. Okay, so my background is I've been in the energy arena for 4 decades, focused on making buildings more energy efficient. And I'm also an adjunct professor at Northwestern, teaching in their master's program on energy and sustainability to a really smart, the kids coming up are smarter than heck. And I work as director of business development at AECOM in our smart energy practice and focus, but I ran for about 30 years an energy consulting practice in Chicago that did a lot of work with commissioning and retro commissioning and building analysis. Fun fact, I am a harmonica player. I've played with the Joffrey Ballet, with a number of blues greats. I've been playing for 50 years, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. Music, who's a musician here? What do you play? Lead guitar. We got the beginning of a band. Maybe I'll tell Ray next year to put some music together. Who else plays? What do you play? Drums. Drums. Do we have a bass player? My son is a bass player. So, you know, I'll bring him next time. What I hope you gain today is I want you to gain an understanding of how this 1.2 trillion, did I say billion? Geez. I guess I guess I'm gonna have to revise that slide. It's kind of hard to conceptualize $1 trillion, even though I know we throw that around a lot. But $1.2 trillion is legislation. That means the money will be spent. It's not like Congress has to authorize it. They have to appropriate it, but the money is committed to be spent over the next 5 years on infrastructure. $550 billion of that is new money. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where that money is going to go to. But I also want to talk about, and the money is supposed to be spent in the next 5 years. I don't think it will be all spent in the next 5 years. In fact, the allocation for 2022 just was approved a few weeks ago by the Congress. So now the federal government agencies now have 6 months to push out the funding that was their, 1/5 of their allocation, ideally in the next 6 months, contracting for that. So how many of you don't have enough business right now? Okay, sorry, we're already swamped. right? It's hard to get people. The challenges of getting equipment, getting things and people. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is training and workforce development, and we need a lot of that in the next 5 years as well, to train people to do what this last section was focused on about all the good work that you guys do. But there's another element of this spending, which is the government is taking kind of a whole of government approach to trying to have all the federal agencies also achieve certain objectives with spending money. Part of that spending of the money is tied to energy efficiency, decarbonization, issues that have to do with equity, jobs flowing to communities that have been disadvantaged or just there's a lot of different dynamics. So the money is at the federal level. It goes to the depending upon what it is, it flows in a lot of different ways. But the organization, what they're focusing on is whole of government. And I think this distinction of decarbonization, it's kind of a clunky word, but when I say organizational decarbonization, I'll give you some insight about what that means and why I think it's relevant to this discussion today. And then the last piece is that if you watch television, you see that Amazon is going to be low carbon by 2040. You wonder, like, what does that mean? How do they really do it when you look at all the trucks and all the equipment and all the shipping of everything? What does that mean? And other companies are also making these kind of commitments. How many of you work for customers that have a net zero, or not net, that have greenhouse gas reduction goals, that they just have those goals that you're familiar with? Okay, and many of you have customers who do, that you may not even know that they do, or maybe they're not rigorous about it. Of those customers, how many do you think that they're serious about it versus interested? So, serious? Okay, or interested. Your clients aren't here. See, that's always an interesting point, right? So that's where, I think the corporate and the institutional customers clearly require commissioning expertise to implement those programs successfully. I know that for one of clients I worked for, a big university, over probably 50% of their reduction goal for energy improvement, for greenhouse gas improvement, came from retro-commissioning systematically operational and maintenance improvements in 38 of their major buildings on their campus. So my company is AECOM. We're one of the largest engineering firms in the world, about 47,000 people, consulting engineers. I bring this up, I don't want to this isn't the commercial. What's interesting to me, and I merged my company into AECOM 3 years ago. So I had my own firm for 28 years. So what ESG, what they've been doing is this environmental, social, and governance distinction. They've been basically embedding those principles now. They're in the process of embedding those principles in everything we do. So one of the tools that we're now developing is called Scopex. And that methodology is designed to try to figure out how we deliver our projects using 50% less carbon of embodied material. Now that's a pretty tall order for steel, concrete, building, or for a transportation agency like Amtrak that's going to be deploying $66 billion in the next 5 years, which we'll talk about a little bit, but Amtrak typically spends $1 billion to $1.5 billion a year on infrastructure, a year. They're going to spend $66 billion in the next 5. So part of the question that Amtrak is looking at is because they've got these government requirements around sustainability and efficiency. How does the carbon impact look when they're just trying to spend all that money? It's kind of a question that most people aren't really aware of or thinking about, but Amtrak's just beginning to think about that because they've been told to, because their condition of spending that money factors into those kind of decisions. So we as a company, just like you guys, are offering certain services where you're aware of a client's concern and you design around it. So we primarily have offices, right? We're human beings, we're a consulting engineering firm by and large. So reaching science-based net zero goals by 2030, we have to ask twice before we travel on business. Other issues around fleet vehicles, other things that would, what does that all mean? That's just one element. But I'm in the environment practice where, we design and deliver. We do commissioning as well as other aspects. And we're doing a whole lot of work in this whole area of energy solutions. I'm in the energy practice area, focusing on a lot of these different issues. And all of these require commissioning, and all of them are in the domain of high performance, trying to create a better world by using new technology, enabling things that people want. So I get it, commissioning works. In my previous company, we did a retro commissioning program just in the Chicago market, did about 80 million square feet of a lot of them downtown large office buildings, where the utility company paid us to go in and basically work with customers to look at operational and maintenance improvements and then help them implement those measures and then get them measured and verified. So that number at the bottom that says therms and kilowatt hours saved was what the people that paid us reported to the Public Utility Commission that was the metric that they had. That they did about 70,000 kilowatt hours. The number that's fascinating to me is this 5-month payback. The customers saw in these buildings operational and maintenance improvements that when they implemented them had a 5-month payback to the customer, which is extraordinary. And it's not, because waste happens and people aren't necessarily focused on operational improvements. So just my background, and also my firm wrote that initial guidebook that Dan Bailey, who talked earlier, did, and Dan worked for me in developing that ACG guidebook, and that's why I'm here today, is they asked us to work on this new book, and Dan took that on, and Ray asked me to talk about the infrastructure legislation a little bit in terms of the context for it. So I think I gave you a little bit of it, but how many of you have a pretty good understanding of this? Because you all read, pretty good understanding of this infrastructure legislation. Show of hands, please. No, nothing to be embarrassed about. So, okay, so I want to give a little bit of a review, but also an articulation. So the money is, it was a big amount that could go into a lot of different areas. And I'm going to look at the chunks, but it goes to a number of different areas that are funded. The funding is the key. The key thing is funded through a lot of existing formula programs and a lot of new and existing competitive grant programs. At the Department of Energy, they've got to give away about $60 billion in the next 5 years. They've created 60 offices, different offices, 11 to 20 existing offices, I think about 40 brand new offices that have never had to deploy what one office is called the Office of Clean Energy. They're going to have $20 billion to invest in new energy technologies. To achieve this idea of net zero emissions in our economy, we don't have the iPhone yet. We don't have this fully figured out. This is only, how old is this thing? Not mine. The distinction of an iPhone. 12 years? Who else? 15. 21. No, more like 2007. So 15 years. April, right now, 15 years ago. And do you remember the first time you saw it? What, just any impressions? I know that when I took my finger on the screen and went like this and opened it and could make something larger, do you remember that? I will admit to you, I thought that was sensuous. I was kind of stunned. What a product, right? And remember when Steve Jobs when he announced that thing, he said, we're announcing 3 products today. What were the 3 products he announced when he announced the iPhone? What was the thing that they had first? Music, and then what else was added to it? And then I'm also going to be giving you like an iPad, like a portable computer. And then what was the other thing? Camera. And he was giving this presentation in Vegas before all these people, and they all were thinking these are 3 different products. And it slowly, did anybody watch this? Remember that all of a sudden they realized it was one device, one thing. So I guess the reason I want to bring this up is that design matters, context matters, innovation matters, and I do remain hopeful and positive that there's a lot of innovation that is going to help us figure out how to decarbonize. And I just think if any of you get into an existing, though you own an electric car, you experience how that works, it's kind of magic in terms of the acceleration, everything else, the quality of it. I don't know if and now all the major car companies are saying we're getting out of the combustion business in a relatively short period of time. It's kind of stunning in a way, I think. So, but what I wanted to just leave you with on this piece of the infrastructure legislation is that these federal agencies are now working to define the details, the regulations, the selection criteria, which in some cases will take months or even years to complete. So they've got 5 years to spend the money, but like you, where have they been the last 2 years? COVID, they've been home. Do you think their workforces are as robust as they were? Do they have all the people to do this? No. So part of the challenge is the agencies are trying to figure out how to deploy the money. A lot of the money, depending upon who gets it and where it goes, will go to states, will go to counties. So there's $7.5 billion for EV charging networks in a grant program. That money is going to flow from the Department of Transportation to the states, and then from there it's going to flow to municipalities. Now, if there's a commissioning opportunity in that to make sure that charging infrastructure gets built right and gets done, where is the governing authority that's going to affect that? Who would be your client? Who will that be? The municipality. So if you're working for a government, a local government, they are going to get money to build out a charging network in the locality. So that would be one of the things you go, if I want business in the area of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, the client for that money would be the local municipality and how they go about deploying their capital. It could be a county, it might be a state, but so just the thread of following the money in each one of these buckets is kind of the game. That's going to be the challenge for all of us. So I think I just wanted to take a moment and give you a sense of where all this money is. So a whole lot of it's going for rail, for bridges, a lot of infrastructure repair of just major projects that have been that are basically shovel ready. Now, does anyone remember in 07 and 08 when they had that the financial crisis and they created the infrastructure legislation then? Where do you think the majority of that money went? There were shovel ready projects in 2008, 2009. Anybody want to hazard a guess? Pardon? ARRA, yeah, the ARRA money. Where do you think the majority of the money was spent on? Roads and bridges, specifically roads, but how roads? How roads? Repaving. Kind of low level in terms of, but get a lot of money out, but it didn't fix the underlying infrastructure. So this one does a lot with it's a lot more money, and it's a lot of infrastructure. Broadband is another area that will be, money spent throughout a lot of different communities depending upon where you are. That is another area of focus. Passenger and freight rail, $66 billion, as I said, to Amtrak. Though, where is Amtrak? Amtrak only owns part of its facility, then it rents and uses uses a lot of the freight rail structure for all across the country. The power in the grid at $65 billion is a fair amount. The water infrastructure at $55 billion is replacing a tremendous amount of lead pipes all throughout the country. So again, if you're working for a municipality or you're asked to bid on a project that would be, that there's going to be a lot of money in that water structure, the whole infrastructure of water. And as we know, water is a critical resource. You can't live without it. Energy is important too. Actually, I got a quick question. So how many of your electric bill is lower than your phone bill and cable combined? Phone and cable combined, your electric bill is lower. This is kind of stunning. Okay, so I'm now going to charge you, so now, how much more would you, now if I said to you, you could have water, you could have electric, you could have cable or your phone, What would you pay the most for if I told you you couldn't have it? Well, I didn't say water. Going cable television, internet access, which I suppose is phone too, and then electricity. I think you'd pay the most for electricity. Because without it, when I was a little kid, there were 6 appliances in your home that used electricity. Now there's a lot more. Everything is reliant upon it. So this thing of power and grid modernization is going to have a lot of money. How many of you focus on electrical systems? Show of hands, electrical. How many of you focus on mechanical systems, by and large? Okay. So in the mechanical infrastructure, there's a lot of, as I saw in the slide from the earlier discussion, a lot of focus on, a lot more technology, a lot more controls, a lot more things that are being used to integrate these systems. The complexity of the systems is going up, and and how they interact with the grid, how they interact with demand response, and lighting controls. It's a lot more complicated than ever before, as you all know. And the dynamic is that the money will be going to a lot of that type of infrastructure as well, that in the mechanical domain. And then money for airports. It's kind of stunning to me that this airports of $25 billion looks small, but that's $25 billion to go to airports around the country to make them more effective, to put more money into their systems. So this is kind of a focus. So the overarching themes, though, because now back up, you're the policymaker, you're the person that's writing the request for qualifications, the RFP, the scope, and you're thinking about social equity, you're thinking about environmental sustainability, safety concerns, resilience. Resilience can also be around floods and fire. How are you building these systems to make sure that if there's water is rising, what are you doing? What's the infrastructure investment going to be made? And then also questions about efficient mobility. So there's these different themes. The area that I want to focus on, because many of you are in the building arena, in the building systems arena, is Executive Order 14057. How many of you have read that? Oh, darn. Okay. You've read it. Okay. What does it say? Oh, I know. You can't read. No, but thank you. But it's an interesting executive order. Now, executive orders, they're like unfunded mandates. Trump did them. Obama did them. Clinton did them. All the Bushes did them. You could kind of, and many people think, so what? Well, what's interesting is that they're often written by some smart people who come up with an interesting idea and say, this is something that the president could announce. What I think is intriguing about this executive order, it was signed in December, is that if you were to decarbonize an organization, and I say an organization could be like any city, any community, a military base, you'd have to look at the electricity inputs, you'd have to look at the buildings, you'd have to look at the vehicles, and you also have to look at how do you buy things, what do you buy? On top of that, you'd need to be thinking about what does operations of that infrastructure look like? What's resiliency? What do we need for backup, for strength of operations, and what happens when things go down? And then the environmental justice and partnership is an element that's also dropped in. But one of the elements that's also about this is workforce training. How do you train the people that buy things to actually care and understand these objectives that might be around net zero, which I think is a little bit ludicrous. We're never going to get to net zero. But I think it's an honest assessment that if you were in fact to try to move towards substantial improvement in efficiencies and carbon use, and how many of you have done energy audits or done energy studies, been participating in that world? Okay, 4 decades I've been in that world. Now carbon is kind of the new metric. So if carbon is a new metric, it's not just about the lowest cost way to save money. One of our clients is considering taking steam systems out of that infrastructure. 21% of their heating load, of their energy use is heating. It's primarily steam. They estimate it'll cost $500 million to change that infrastructure. Now, they could do it. They actually have an internal commitment to do it. They're trying to figure out how they can do it. But all of a sudden, carbon becomes a metric for evaluating a project, the carbon content of the fuel, not just cost. It's always been about cost for those of us in the energy world. Low cost, payback, fastest payback. So when carbon gets put in there, but I think the other interesting distinction is how many of you work for federal clients? Okay, so all federal clients have to be responsive to this executive order, at least putting their plans together, at least suggesting they're serious. In the British TV series, there used to be a program, and the brand new minister would come in and, sir, you call me on the carpet. You're the new premier. You run the department, and you tell me all your goals, and you work for this new president, and this is really serious, and we're going to do this. We're going to get it done. And you just simply go, yes, minister. Yes, minister. Wait for new guy to come in. What are your goals? Yes, minister. Yes, minister. So, I'm saying tongue-in-cheek, there's going to be varying degrees of rigor, but we do know that certain agencies, like Amtrak, have requested a briefing to their board that puts together a low emission strategy for how their money is going to be spent, and they have a board of governors, and they're going to be giving their procurement people marching orders that will have to do with elements of these items related to how they spend their money, how that $66 billion gets spent. So, I think for those of you who are, it's just in every agency, every military base, we work with NAFEC, AECOM, our largest clients, the federal government. So we're seeing, in this infrastructure legislation, the $1.2 trillion does not go to DOD. It goes to the civilian agencies for infrastructure development in the United States. So this is the part that the administration, because the administration gets to be with Congress, they're the folks that are designing the game in terms of how should the agencies be thinking about budgets and plans. All the agencies have sustainability plans. They've all been making improvements on efficiencies and improvements. But for you as commissioning agents, I would just argue that they're looking at this idea of a 65%, we narrow it carefully, the 65% or 50% reduction in buildings by 2032. Many of them have achieved 20% since the base of 2005. So different agencies have done different things, but the order is going to be much greater. There's also going to be a greater focus on using the energy savings performance contracts that were historically done, but they've also got provisions where 50% of that money could be funded from the government out of infrastructure funds to buy down the cost of these performance contracts. Because some of this distinction of, how many of you have worked on an energy savings performance contract or as a subconsultant to those guys? So they will now be doing, greenhouse gas reduction investments, which don't necessarily save money, but save energy, save carbon, are now fair game to be included in these kind of contracts. Yes, sir.
So on net zero, we talk a lot about reduction and decarbonization.
Yeah.
Comment a little bit about energy generation, which also helps you with net zero, right?
Very much, very much. On the renewables side, and there was a slide I wanted to drop in here. But the renewables pick up from, so on the electricity side, they're suggesting that, so this is an absolute reduction of 50% through improvements in net and end use efficiency. On the electricity side, which is very aggressive, I might argue it's too aggressive. And they're actually, and the White House is actually issuing more specific follow-on directions that's going to get more into the narrow directions in the next month, within the next month, around this specific executive order. But I do want to I thank you for asking that question, because I also want to draw the 100% carbon-free electricity, what that means, by 2030, including 50% on a 24/7 basis. So let's say you're Los Alamos National Laboratories in Arizona, New Mexico. and you use, a fair amount of energy on that facility, what that 24/7 basis means is that if you were to contract, like you could put a certain amount of solar energy on site, right? This could also be like an airport. You're not putting windmills on the airport. But you can, but some airports can put solar energy adjacent. You just make sure that they're not shining up at the pilots when they land. But you can put a certain amount of renewable energy, solar on site. But you can't put nearly enough to power Los Alamos Lab or a hospital facility or a corporate campus or Disney World. But the state of Florida will take care of that. They won't have to worry about it anymore. Or the city of Orlando. But I want to finish my question real quick. But that 24/7 basis means that Los Alamos would have to contract for a renewable resource that specifically meets their load shape on a 24/7 basis. So if they're going to offset 50% of their electricity consumption, that's got to be matched by what is done in their power region, right? So if you're in Texas, it's got to be done in Texas. If it's in the Chicago area, it's got to be done in the PJM market, the regional market for the electric transmission. So in other words, it's got to be real. It's not just we're buying wind farms in Iowa. It's got to balance the load in your region. Does that make sense? Does that help answer the question? So you can contract for it, or you can buy you could buy it too. You could buy the wind farm, and different businesses have done that. So it's an interesting question. Out of that $66 billion, for example, with Amtrak, a lot of Amtrak's load, they use a lot. How many of you remember the Acela line from, it's electric. It's electric from the, going up there. Where do you think, if you were to provide electricity, clean energy, renewable energy for Amtrak, where would you get it from? If you're on the East Coast, from solar, where else? Huh? Nuclear? Water. See, that could be water. Water is part of it. What would be in the water?
Turbine.
What would be above the water?
Oh, windmills.
Windmills. So they've just been doing leases offshore for developing lots of windmills. Interestingly, when my company did a study for ComEd, Commonwealth Edison Utilities, about how much wind resource was available in Illinois in 1999. We weren't it wasn't a big study. They weren't paying us a lot of money. We did like a literature review to see how much wind energy is available in Illinois. With data that we knew in 2000, in the state of windmill development in 2000, we concluded that the wind resource was poor, not very robust. Why do you think that was? With what we knew in 2000 about the windmills, yes?
Batteries,
lack of batteries, okay. That's not it. Next.
The wind speed.
Too cold, too ice. Wind speed gets to it, but it's not quite wind speed. Voltage drop? Nope. Consistency what?
the technology of the windmill.
Yeah, what about the technology of the windmills? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is part of why they're more efficient. I love, you guys are all engineers, I love this. But first principles, let's get back to first principles. What did windmills look like in 2000? How high were they? Were they 18 stories tall? So the anemometer, the data that was in the universities who had done the testing with anemometers in the 70s and 80s that measured wind speeds in the bluffs out in Galena, Illinois on the Mississippi River only had anemometers that were probably 30 feet in the air. So where was the wind? Much higher. We had no freaking idea. And the wind farms, the technology was not, hundreds of feet in the air with these ginormous windmills that are like 1.5 megawatts per turbine. I mean, who could have imagined that? So that is what they can now build. Now, the other issue around wind, think about, in Hyannisport, the Kennedys and all the folks in Martha's Vineyard were concerned about, what were they concerned about? The what? They were concerned about the birds, but really what were they concerned about? Their view, come on. They didn't want to look out and see the windmill. And, so there it is. Now where can you put those things? A lot further out. So if you're Amtrak, you've got $66 billion, you could buy a wind farm. Where would you put it? In Iowa? In Pennsylvania? Or in the ocean? Now, but if you're Amtrak and you've got $66 billion, and this is like a once-in-a-lifetime investment. This ain't happening again. You spend $1 billion a year. Are you going to get $66 billion again? Probably not. So maybe they would be best, to your point about renewables earlier, they're probably best to contract a third-party developer to build that wind farm, because but for Amtrak contracting the use of that wind farm might not get built, 30 miles out in the ocean. That then brings in the interconnects to supply the electricity to the Northeast corridor that does it. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Do they consider these carbon trading schemes?
Yeah.
In this?
Yeah. Definitely carbon trading schemes. I mean, this is part of how you're going to get it. It's a contract, but they want to make it real. This idea of matching your usage, this 50% on a 24 basis, matching your uses in the area where you are is powerful. But it just puts a tremendous amount. I mean, these kind of distinctions give the wind industry, which is now competitive, very competitive. Wind and solar is produced like worldwide basis. The amount of energy wind and solar added to the grid last year, and if you compare it to the fossil fuels that were added to the grid, and then the fossil fuels that were retired from the grid, if you added 8,760 hours, the amount of the fossil fuel plant, the net increase of fossil fuels last year was 36 hours of manufacturing. All the rest, 36 to, it's under 100 hours. Meaning the vast majority of what was added to the grid last year was wind and solar, net addition. So, and the renewable resource has gotten a lot cheaper. How many of you have worked on solar or wind projects? Okay, so they're getting, the products are getting better, the prices are coming down, and this is a, yes sir?
Just a general question.
Yeah.
I get the intent of what this is trying to do.
Yep, and it's a federal, and it applies to federal
Yes.
facilities. Now corporations are also adopting it.
Well, my question is, if for the 100% carbon-free,
Yep.
pollution-free electricity.
Which nuclear, by the way, is
Right.
assessed as
Correct.
such.
So if it's not being produced at this particular building and trying to get to
Yep.
net zero emission,
Right?
the carbon's got to be produced.
It's got to be, well, that's right.
So
So
it's a shift
it's a
where
shift,
it
well, it's a shift, but it's also a contracting of a renewable resource.
Yes. But
So what happens to the
right.
existing?
So the extraction of the materials to
Yep.
do it creates carbon.
Right?
The manufacturing
There's that
process.
too. That's right.
So if you're taking it from here, it's just being shifted over to here.
Meaning you make a windmill, you make a windmill, you make a solar collector, you do a geothermal heat pump. There's a whole lot of energy embedded,
Yes.
which is part of what procurement is also getting to. This procurement distinction. So a lot of corporations are looking at this too. A lot of corporations, from Amazon to others, Amazon is thinking. How many of you work for Amazon? Commissioning related stuff? I mean, I don't. They probably would shoot you if you said you worked for them. Lots of non-disclosure agreements. But I apologize. Am I on camera? Am I being filmed? Yeah. Okay. Be careful what I say. Hello, Jeff Bezos. I love him. Love that guy. Mackenzie Scott. That would be that. Man, how much money she's giving away? We should all just open up a not-for-profit doing great work in the world, and it's remarkable. She's given away $8 billion just this last year alone. Amazing. So, but a lot of corporations are making these kind of commitments too. So I think the message here, and I want to move on, is that, and then vehicles, they're saying net vehicle emission acquisitions by 2035. So the federal government looks at this, I mean, Avis and all the different car companies, and we've got a manufacturer, they're not a car company, they're a user, but if the government is going to be setting procurement policies around these areas, this is kind of where, the great Wayne Gretzky, he skated to where the puck was going. When they said, "Why are you so good?" I skate to where the puck is going. So this is where the puck is going in the domain of how governments, how businesses, how institutions, universities, who, you know, and yet, those things are usually championed by a few people, and as you all know, your clients are overworked. I need one more specification to worry about. This is one more project I got to check on a box. How serious am I going to really take it? So to the extent that you can make it easy for them, and you can say, yeah, we got you. We can figure out what to do and make this work. You know, that's your business opportunity always.
I have a question before you
Yes, sir.
switch to that. So the net zero emissions buildings, this is only for the federal buildings?
It's only for federal. It's only for federal facilities.
Buildings are even more than the federal buildings.
Oh, much more. I'm giving.
Are they going to do anything about the?
Well, I mean, a lot of private companies and institutions have goals. So
I mean, the government, are they going to help the homeowners to improve their?
the homeowners. There's some money in the infrastructure legislation for homeowners that goes through Department of Energy, and there's some money for a lot of the work for homes is supported by the local utilities for energy efficiency programs that local utilities have. So that's typically where and that's state policy. So that would be like the local utility, you know, like the local utility, depending upon their, you know, issues and their financial situation and how what their policies are, right? So I submit this to you as a framework. You know, if a new president comes in, could they rescind this? Heck yeah. But if you were to suggest, how would you go about decarbonizing the US economy? I wanted to give you some insight about this policy framework what the government's trying to think about, and that is going to be operational in the next several years and is going to be operational in terms of how this money gets spent. Though many of the agencies, Department of Defense, are going to be putting policies in place, but they're not getting funded by the infrastructure legislation. Key distinction, okay?
And when you say federal buildings, you also mean like the U.S. Army?
Yeah,
Base?
U.S. Army, DOD, absolutely. But DOD's got to do it with existing money. So, you know, we had a contract that didn't.
This isn't going to go to 3 or 4 military projects.
Oh yeah, no. This applies to the military, but there is an asterisk. Oh, if you're the Air Force, I don't think we're going to get your vehicles to be net zero carbon anytime soon. You might have to use a little bit of that rocket fuel for a while. So there are exceptions. Same thing for the military, for their certain things, but what they can, their bases, certain facilities, infrastructure, things which they can control, it applies to that. I mean, we got to be real. I mean, every executive order has the asterisk, you know, that if this is too much for your agency in certain ways, let us know. So thank you for that. Yes?
Maybe it's too early to say how much of a flow-down effect is going to be Amazon.
Yeah,
They all have government contracts.
they do.
So as part of their contract with the government, are they going to be mandated to follow these kind of rules?
Well, I don't know about mandated, but when Amazon did their low emissions and their carbon, and Bezos put $2 billion into a fund to make investments in clean technologies, what do they produce a lot of? Waste. All those boxes. What do? They got all these people driving all over the place. So it's a very resource-intensive business. So just like when BP, do you remember what BP stood for about 20 years ago? What was the phrase they used?
Beyond petroleum.
Beyond petroleum, bad politics. Beyond petroleum. Beyond petroleum, bad politics. So, you know, beyond petroleum was a nice phrase. Put some solar collectors up on a roof of a service station. I mean, obviously, industries change and go through different modifications. Amazon, every company does different things for different reasons, right? But your point about flow down, if you are a federal contractor, I mean, we at AECOM are doing certain things because the investment community, you know, suggests that they want to see our climate reporting, our ESG reporting requirements. You know, that's part of what, you know, there's a lot of different reasons that drive organizations to do things. So in that procurement bucket, it might be when we're buying our products or services, we want to get a commissioning authority that meets certain skill sets that we know will be attentive to these concerns, for example. So it does drive the standards. I'm going to jump to a couple of other things, and I just wanted to, when you want to go to deep carbonization, we all know the top part about energy efficiency. You're employing it to the maximum degree to reduce the energy needs that have to be met. So that's kind of like base level now. Then decarbonizing the power supply, which we talked about, this other aspect of, the whole power industry. So that's a whole nother world. It's decarbonizing the power supply. If you are going to decarbonize, because right now, most electric cars are simply plugged into the resource in their community, which they get electricity from, and it has the same carbon content that it did before. It's a lot cheaper in terms of how much energy it costs. It's a lot cheaper to get your car powered by electricity than it is by gas. And then economy-wide electrification. So that's a really interesting distinction. A lot more is going towards electricity now. A lot more is going to electricity. I used to go to conferences, I had my laptops and everything else. How much can you do on this thing? It's stunning. I almost think I should have a second one just because. Meaning just like I travel with it at all times, knowing that if I just leave that thing somewhere, which I always do, top of my car, wherever, not always, but what the heck? How many of you lost your phone in the last 30 days? See, we hold on to these things like for dear life. Or maybe you just don't want to admit it. But, but there's more and more things going towards electrification. There's more value. I don't think Steve Jobs ever thought that this would be a bank, and you're managing your investments. And how many of you checked your 401k this morning? You can check your investments. It's crazy what you can get. So, zero carbon fuels that have that so it could be, nuclear, a lot of different distinctions, a lot of wind, a lot of solar, a lot of battery storage. We mentioned battery storage. So DOE has $21 billion to figure out what kind of technologies can work. So for those of you who work in the federal government and want to play with some renewables, maybe there's some demonstration projects that would be cool to get into. When you're in a business like you guys all are, where you're saturated with the possibilities of work, when you're picking your clients to the extent that you can, you always like them that they pay you well, but you also want to work on cool stuff, interesting work, right? Right? Ideally? So this is an area that I think is really intriguing, and it needs your expertise because things can fall apart because they're not commissioned right. Has anyone ever said that? So you build this great system, but if you don't have the protocols to make sure that you're testing it properly, you may not get the answer you were hoping for because, we went into plenty of buildings that were designed for LEED silver or LEED gold, and they were operated poorly. Just because they were certified does not mean they perform to that level. And the same thing is true of any number of things that are being done to figure out how systems work. And commissioning agents are commissioning service experts and what? Commissioning? Providers. Okay, we're all providers. We've all been providers. It's a beautiful distinction. Versus an agent. I don't want to be an agent. I carry a badge and a gun. Carbon capture removal, that's a whole other area. Carbon capture removal. They've been working on projects to capture carbon and sequester it. Hydrogen's a whole other area that's going on. So, these decarbonization technologies that are on the radar are stunning. You can't read all this. I'm not going to read it all to you. But there's a whole lot of things for efficiency increases, combined heat and power, all these different things you can do today, high efficiency turbines, compressors, and then fuel shifting. Fuel shifting. What does that look like? A lot of technologies around fuel shifting. And then deep decarbonization, fuel cells, solar power, what is the whole hydrogen world? DOE has an $8 billion investment they're going to make in hydrogen development, 4 clean energy hubs around hydrogen. Hydrogen's got a lot of potential. So this is, but expertise, your expertise, I would suggest pick an area that you want to play. I'm 63 years old. My grandmother lived to 104. Grandfather lived to 104. I may not be doing the same thing I've always been doing, but I'd like to find ways to contribute. So what do you really enjoy? What do you really enjoy? What do you want to focus on? So where I'd finalize this is that, this is about playing the long game in terms of this journey that we're on. Results take time to bloom. If you sit in the front row, congratulations, you're in the front row. You don't have to be distracted by those behind you. And then unexpected assignments can be a springboard for advancement. I mean, these distinctions that are here are opportunities to distinguish yourself in your expertise. And I think, you know, continual learning and change build resilience and can lead to greater success and, frankly, happiness. You know, I've been playing harmonica for a number of years, and, you know, band is having fun with it. And, you know, I never used to play harmonica when I was a young man, and most people didn't know I played. Now there's clients that do not want to hear from me unless I leave them a voicemail that's got just a little snippet. You know, like, hey, George, how you doing today? This is I didn't even need to tell you what my name is. When you get a chance later this afternoon, can you give me a call? I want to talk about that lighting project we're working on. Out. Thank you very much. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. Any further discussion? There's probably a lot here, but I wanted to be rigorous in my time management with you guys. Yes?
Anything can be engineered, but how resilient are windmills in the ocean with respect to
Wind,
foreign threats and/or
foreign threats, yeah, hurricanes. Pardon? Seismic, cybersecurity.
tsunamis?
I think Europe has a lot of experience with offshore wind in the North Sea, and that's a wicked environment that they have.
Yeah, I'm not trying
And I think that's a wicked environment. So the good news is, like, just thinking globally, a tremendous amount has been done globally, especially in the North Sea. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, question in terms of following the money.
Yeah.
We do quite a bit of work. We do a fair share of work in the federal sector. It's one to have the money, and then having groups that are prepared to spend the money.
Yes.
And I'm interested to know your strategy behind, one, knowing where the money goes, and
Yep.
actually focusing on those that are actually ready to spend.
I would like to suggest that ACG could take this one on a little bit, because this 5-year piece on the infrastructure, it's hard for us to track it, but I do think that the association could be helpful, especially in the built environment. Like, where are the dollars that could be helpful? This could be an interesting thing that they could add to the things that they're tracking right now, because they're broad in distinctions. Because it's a real, go ahead.
In 5 years is a very short period.
It's a very short period of time, right? Very short period of time, and you know, one wonders whether it might go further if they can't spend it all in that time. I don't know how they're going to spend all that money this quickly, other than paving roads. You know, like, to do things more complicated and with quality takes some time. Yes, sir.
Someone mentioned just in Europe the windmills offshore. So the driver right now, so I'm from Germany, and so the driver right now in Germany is, for instance, they build like crazy these offshore windmills. They had a problem to transport the energy, the electricity, to the center of Europe, and they resolved that now by pushing the hydrogen technology forward, using existing gas pipelines and replacing it. And the drive now is so intense because of the Ukraine war.
Yes.
They plan by the end of the year to go to zero oil from Russia. So that means the drive right now to push this technology forward is so intense that spending the money is not a problem. There will be so much activity that is unbelievable. So we, at the moment here in the US, don't have that pressure right now.
Right.
But we will need to hurry up too, because then we are not the technology leader anymore, but we are trailing behind. And I think this is very important to see that, anything what we do, for instance, there are always arguments, for instance, to say, oh, solar panels, or windmills, they are bad for birds and everything. Everything what we do on this limited space on the globe has always an impact.
Yes.
It's just right now the situation that we have a situation with the carbon emissions that might get us a little bit decimated in a faster way than the other way we go forward.
Yeah, well, it's a really good point, and I do think that we're in a race in Europe to do as much renewables and conservation as possible. Conservation could go a tremendous way just to getting rid of the natural gas usage, where if people wore wool caps and sweaters next winter, I mean, what's a little sacrifice in temperature to save a tremendous amount. But the technology with hydrogen is rapid, and I would suggest that I'm saying it's going to be hard to spend the money. However, the legislation was passed the 15th of November. We're now about 120 days in. 5 years is about 1,900 days. So we're like on the 5-yard line. So there's a lot of people that want to get this money deployed, and there's a lot of work to do. So I do think, to your point, there's momentum. There's a lot of momentum driving this right now. Anything other question? Thanks, everybody.